So, welcome. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Adam, as it helpfully says on the screen. I am one of the careers advisors as part of the careers team, consultants rather. And in this session, what I'm going to be doing is giving you a bit of a whistle stop tour about graduate schemes, what they are, why you need to think about them, how they're different from all sorts of different other graduate roles. That is, I guess, the first thing to say. Graduate scheme and a graduate role, they're kind of the same and different. All grad schemes are graduate roles. Not all graduate roles are grad schemes. But we'll get onto that in detail later on. So, first thing I want you guys to do is if you could scan that QR code for me. I'll give you a second to do that. What this allows me to do is register your attendance so that I can then send you the slides and send you the recording. If you can't scan this for whatever reason, let's say you've joined on your phone or the QR code reader isn't working, whatever, there will be an opportunity to ask for the slides later on in the session. This just makes sure that I can do it as quickly and easily as possible so that you'll get the slides on the Thursday. Okay, so let's get started properly then, shall we? This is, I guess, broadly speaking, what I'm going to cover this evening. We're going to look at what graduate schemes actually are. We're going to look at the types of employers that you should be targeting for grad schemes, how to find these roles, what the process is like, and I guess the sort of pros and cons of grad schemes, why you might consider them or why you might maybe not be that attracted to them. They are not a silver bullet by any means. Now, as I said, if you do have any questions as we go through, please do put them in the chat and I will get to them at various points throughout the session. So let's have a sort of, I guess, an overview, right, of what a graduate scheme is. Now, broadly speaking, they're all reasonably similar. And the way I like to think about it is graduate schemes are what large employers, so the really big graduate employers, think top sort of 100, these are the schemes that those employers use to recruit their graduates. They are an established scheme, an established way of recruiting grads that last anywhere between 1 to 3 years. The standard length is around 2. And they're an established, very structured program that a large company will put new graduate hires through to make sure they will get to the same level. And it can have various different streams. There might be a marketing grad scheme, as well as a logistics grad scheme, as well as a sales grad scheme in the same company. And they'll take on a number of graduates each year. Now, that number can be pretty big, can also be pretty small. It will depend on the employer. So when we say graduate scheme, that is what we mean. It is important to say, I said it at the top, but just for the people who maybe joined late, a graduate scheme and a graduate role are different. A graduate role is any kind of job that is graduate level. A graduate scheme is this specific thing that I am talking about. All graduate schemes are graduate roles, not all graduate roles. In fact, most graduate roles aren't graduate schemes. So just bear that in mind. All right. Now, these things have various names. It might be a leadership program, training program, a fast track. You might have seen, for example, the civil service fast stream. That is their graduate program. That's their graduate scheme. So various different names, but they all essentially do the same thing. They are how large organizations handle their graduate recruitment. So that is what we mean. These are the definition of terms, right? So let's go through why you would be interested in, or why you might not be interested in, all of these schemes. And I'm going to go through it in a literal A to Z. So we've got a fair bit to get through. Just to say at the top, this session is probably going to take about 45 minutes. So let's get going. So in terms of the application process, this is what it looks like. Because these are very structured, the graduate schemes themselves, and because it's large organizations that are doing them, the recruitment process tends to be reasonably involved. It'll start with some form of application. That might be a CV and cover letter, might be a full application form through an application portal, anything like that. However, there will be some form of written application. Then, quite often, there's a psychometric test. These can be verbal or numerical reasoning, game based, might be personality, it could be any or all of those potentially. Then there's some kind of interview element, whether that's a video interview where you log into their portal and they show questions on the screen and you record an answer to them. It might be a telephone interview, maybe with a HR rep, something like that. After that, almost invariably, there is an assessment center element. This is where they'll bring a shortlisted selection of graduates into one area. It might be online, it might be an actual physical place, and they'll put you through different activities, tests, tasks, group work, and more often than not, a face-to-face one-to-one interview with someone reasonably senior. At the end of that, then you get your offer. Now, they might do all of this, they might do only some of it. This is just to get you sort of prepared of what you might face. These are the things you could come up against. Now, it's important to say, and I'll get on to how we can help later, we can help with all of this. So if you are at all concerned with anything that's on the screen, whether you need your application sorting, you have no idea about assessment centres or psychometric tests, come and have a chat. We can help with all of it. There's support available that can get you better. And I'll talk about some of the things you can do to maximise your chances at all of these stages. Now, in terms of, I guess, a few of those sort of headline tips, right? First, with your application, it is really important to tailor your application. And what I mean by that is tailor it towards, at the very least, the sector that you're going to be working in, the job that you're going to be applying to, and if possible, the company, right? And that goes just as much for things like AI generated applications and stuff. Not saying don't use that. Absolutely. AI, ChatGPT, it can get you to a level, right? Maybe mediocre, I'd say. Then you've got to tailor it. You've got to tailor it towards the specific thing you're applying to. It is far better to send fewer tailored applications than loads of generic ones, broadly speaking. Assessment centers, psychometric tests, these are, I guess, difficult to fool in the sense that companies want to see how you communicate, how you work as part of a team, things like interviews as well. The biggest thing that's going to help you with all of this, but particularly those elements, practice. No one, or very few people at least, are good at any of this straight away. So practice really does make perfect in this instance. And again, if any of this is a bit concerning, you just need a bit of help, come and have a chat, come and see us. We can help with all of it. Okay. Having said that, there are a few things that I would always suggest to help boost your employability, help you develop the skills that you need and the ability to talk about those skills. First thing, and you'll get all these links, so don't worry too much about taking them down. We have a little tool we call the skills audit. This is where you can actually reflect on the skills you've got and think about, am I good at these things? Am I rubbish at these things? Do I need to get better? Part-time work, whatever work that is always valid. Doesn't have to be specific to your sector. It can really develop and demonstrate your skills. Same with volunteering. If you're someone that hasn't been able to get the part-time work, that is not the end of the world. Volunteering, any work shadowing, any extracurricular stuff, all of it, I promise you, is valid. All of it will help you stand out from that competition. The key really, and I'll talk about this later on, is how to talk about it, which again, we can help with. Okay. Now, talked a little bit about that, but key thing to remember, graduate schemes are really competitive. Now, that's not to say to warn you off them, in the sense that you have just as much chance as anybody else who wants to go for these things. However, they can't be the only thing that you're thinking about, because they are really competitive and they don't actually represent all the graduate jobs that are available. You can, however, focus on the things that you can actually control. You cannot control who else applies to something or who else turns up for interview, but what you can do is think about the research that you've done, the preparation that you've done, whether it's for the application, the video interview, whatever it is, the experience you've got. Do you know you don't have a lot of experience? All right. Well, what can we do between now and when you get to that interview to build that experience? Is there some volunteering you can do? There are other things that you can do to help boost your experience. Maybe it might be helping or getting help on how to talk about the things you've already got, how to tailor your applications, all of these things that can go into maximizing your chances, right? Yes, it's competitive, but these little things that you can do that boost your chances called incremental gains, little things that you can do to boost your chances that then all add up. So please don't feel like you don't have a chance just because it's competitive. I guarantee you that's not the case. Now, a few things about deadlines. Don't mean to scare you, but these are actually recruiting now. And typically they close between November and December, which is why we kind of put this, what you would consider potentially quite early in the semester, because by the time you get to November, it's kind of getting quite late. So if this is something you are interested in, we kind of need to get our skates on. What, halfway through October at this point, nearly 2/3. So we need to start thinking about getting your applications together. Now, again, we can help with this, absolutely. But start thinking about it, start getting things together quickly. Start thinking about the ones that you are interested in, because that time will go by really quick. And you don't want to be in a position where you might come to us, let's say in June, and say, right, I really want a good grad scheme. And I'd have to say, well, mate, the ship has sailed at this point. It's done. It won't start up again until around September. You don't want to be that person. So start thinking about it early. I mean, you're all coming to this, so that's good. You're in a good place, but start putting your applications together. So this, broadly speaking, is kind of how it works in terms of the timelines. So they start opening around June-ish, sometimes a bit later, but they'll all definitely be open by now. And then around November, December, applications close and the selection process begins. This does take time. It is quite common for you not to hear for a couple of months once you've submitted your application. So you don't need to worry too much if you're in that position. Doesn't mean that you've been just forgotten about. That's not how it works. And then the selection process goes on, where you get your invites to psychometric tests, to video interviews, to assessment centers, all that sort of stuff. Okay. We have had a question, how can I apply for these schemes? I'm going to talk about that later on in the session. There'll be a few resources that I'll sort of highlight that'll help you get to these schemes. And all the way through the year, you get around to about June, that's when you start hearing about offers, right? Which all hopefully, as well as the kind of competition aspect, demonstrates you can't really be putting all your eggs in this basket. You can't really just be counting on the graduate schemes to come off, because if they don't, for whatever reason, maybe you're just unsuccessful, you won't necessarily know until quite late in the year, at which point you don't want to be panicking. So this goes to my sort of golden rule of job hunting. You've got to do a little bit of lots of different things. Graduate schemes can be part of the things you apply to. They can't be the only ones. Okay. Now, these graduate schemes can come from anywhere. The big employers are usually where they come from. Now, what I would suggest, because these are some examples, but they're going to be loads, right? What you can do, and this goes to the question I just kind of answered, what you can do is work on a list of organizations that you might be interested in working for. Are there particular employers that you know you're interested in? If so, then part of your job search needs to be putting them on a target list and regularly checking in on their graduate schemes. Maybe they're not open till later. Maybe they're already open and you need to apply, but you need to be checking with them regularly, checking what sort of roles they have available. Because yes, there are portals that you can use to find graduate schemes. The biggest one is a website called Target Jobs. You'll find loads of grad schemes on there, but there's no guarantee that any particular website's going to have everything. And if you know that there are particular employers you're interested in, check with them directly. I know it's not, I guess, easy in that sense. You've got to do the legwork, but if you really want it, you're going to go after it. So this needs to be part of your, I call it a rotation, right? A rotation of activity that you want to do to make sure you're getting the most out of your job search. Checking specific employers and their grad schemes is going to be part of that rotation and quite an important part. Now, there's going to be all sorts of sectors. What I would suggest, though, and we've got some links on there, I'll update these because for some reason the dates aren't quite right, but don't worry too much about that. You can look at particularly our Which Career site. So this is the University of Manchester's actual website. There on Which Career, you will find loads of actual job opportunities to apply to. Same with Career Connect, but also Prospects. That is a really useful resource. Target Jobs is a really useful resource for this. This is I already mentioned it, but that's where a lot of these roles are going to be advertised, and then the actual job sectors on Prospects. Now we have had another question. Are there schemes for the environment and sustainability sector? Absolutely, there will be, particularly around environment and sustainability consultancy. So have a look for those. Okay. Moving on to F. The other thing that I really would suggest, now we have had one of our careers fairs already. That was last week. That was the STEM fair, but we do have our big autumn careers fair coming up. This is on Tuesday the 28th and Wednesday the 29th of October. This will be in Whitworth Hall from 11 to 4 both days. Don't need an appointment, just turn up. But a lot of the employers there are going to have their own graduate schemes. So simple, come along, have a chat with them, see what employers you're interested in, see what their graduate schemes is. Are they open? What's involved? All that sort of stuff. This can be a really useful event to just get as much information as possible to then put in your application. And also help you decide, do you actually want to work for these people? Okay. Now, just wanted to touch on grade requirements. This is what would I say, a little bit of a variable in the sense that there are no hard grade requirements for all graduate schemes. As a general rule, they look for graduates with a 2-1 in any degree. It's very rare that they need a specific degree to go into a graduate scheme, but they do generally need a 2-1, although there are plenty of grad schemes that require a 2-2 and above as well. So that's what you need to be aware of. And I guess think about your own sort of, what are you aiming for? If you're aiming for a 2-1, great. If you're aiming for a 2-2, that might limit what you could access in a grad scheme sense. So maybe you need to think about other things, or maybe you just need to think about, right, how can I maximize my chances here? But like I say, this isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule. Certain grad schemes are very open to any graduate, certain grad schemes are going to have higher requirements. So this is why research is so important. If you know there are particular grad schemes that you're interested in, look at what their requirements are and act accordingly. Now, I would say that there are certain pros and cons of grad schemes. They are not the silver bullet, right? They're, I guess, one of the most visible parts of the graduate labour market, but they're not the only thing by any means. Graduate schemes can be really attractive to graduates for obvious reasons. They're generally associated with high salaries, recognizable names, big brands, particularly big employers. Some have what we call rotational placements, where you see different parts of the business. And there's a lot of training in grad schemes inherent to the grad scheme, right? It's very structured, there's training, there's development. However, there are cons. Like I've already said, very competitive. And because these are large employers, you are going to be a small cog in a big wheel, in the sense that you know you're going to be one part of a very big organization. They can involve quite a lot of hours. They may not, they usually do, but they may not lead to permanent positions. And they can be quite location specific. The other thing that I always like to say is it can be a common sort of idea and we'll get to this in the myths section, that graduate schemes are the biggest graduate job opportunity in the sense that, there's loads of them. They represent about 10% of all graduate jobs available at any given time. Now, that means that you should definitely go for them, but they're not the only thing. And most graduates don't go into grad schemes. So don't be afraid so much of not necessarily getting one because most people don't. Not to say that you shouldn't target them and be really enthusiastic about them, absolutely. But it goes to that kind of holistic job search idea that I had, a little bit of lots of different things. You need to do other applications. You need to think about other employers as well, because this won't necessarily be the key to answering all your problems. Now, a few, I guess, tips to go through, some of which I've already mentioned. These are from actual students that ended up on grad schemes. The importance of tailoring your applications. And I'll probably repeat this, so forgive me, but that might mean because you're tailoring, because you're spending work on applications, that maybe you apply to fewer jobs. I would always advocate quality over quantity. You get a much better return on your investment of time if you spend more time on the applications. It might feel like applying to jobs is a numbers game, but I promise you that's a bit of an illusion. You're far better off spending more time on an application than firing off the same thing to loads of different employers. That will involve things like research, a lot of practice. This is going to be an iterative process, right? You're going to maybe need to try a few things, get some help from us. Definitely use the career service. We have our own application reviews where we go through an application with you, give you feedback. That can be really helpful. Okay. Already talked about, definitely get your applications in early and think about what else you're going to do over that recruitment process. What things could be helpful, the research that might be helpful. We've got the example of a bank here. Another example I had last year was someone who applied to the co-op and how they put lots of research into why they wanted to work for the co-op rather than any other potential bank. So think about these things, the kind of research, the kind of prep that you can do. And then that will hopefully feed into your ability to articulate your interest and articulate your skills. It's a bit anecdotal, but in my experience, the big problem that students have is articulating their skills, talking about what they're good at, talking about particular instances of when they've demonstrated their skills. I mentioned here the STAR technique: situation, task, action, and result. If that is something that is new to you, please go on our YouTube channel, University of Manchester Career Service. We have loads of resources about how to use things like the STAR technique to talk about your skills. I can't cover it in huge detail here. But again, if this is something that maybe you struggle with, come and see us. We can have a chat. We can help with all of this. It takes that little bit of practice, that little bit of support. Already talked a little bit about things like getting as much information as possible, things like careers fairs, but also alumni. Use things like LinkedIn. That can be really helpful. Do a little bit of low-key networking. Talk to people who got onto the graduate scheme. Can be super useful. And I know it's easy for me to say because I'm not going through it, but try and get into the mindset that you can enjoy the process, or at least look at it as a sort of a fact-finding exercise, in the sense that, yes, you are applying to these jobs. You are essentially trying to convince people to give you a chance, but they're also doing the same for you, in the sense that they've got to convince you that you want to work there. So what do you need to figure out, whether it's for the civil service fast stream, as it was for this person, or another employer? What do you need to find out to make sure that you want to work there? If you can reframe it that little bit in your mind, it can be a much different process, a much more chill, relaxed process, if you can believe that. Now, like I said, in fact, most graduate schemes will have a job at the end of it, but that is not a guarantee. So before you apply to somewhere, it's always a good idea to check. Okay. Now, where you then go from there, that could be up to you. In the sense that once you've got your graduate job at the end of the scheme, you might stay with that employee, you might go somewhere else, a couple of years down the line. These schemes and any graduate job don't necessarily have to dictate the rest of your career. There's no such thing really anymore as a job for life with one employer. It just doesn't happen. This is it's a long-term process. So not necessarily saying go into it thinking about your next step straight away, but think about your career in a sort of longer term sense. Yes, this will be potentially your next step. The step after that could look radically different, and that would be absolutely fine. Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to say, sort of allied to that, it might be that for whatever reason, this doesn't work, or the first job application gets rejected, or whatever else. A lot of this is about perseverance. And we get this a lot. It'll depend on the student. I've had some students come to me and say, well, I've sent loads of applications and I'm not really getting very far. I'll then ask, well, how many is loads? And I promise you, someone actually said, yeah, I've sent like 4 applications. I've not heard anything back. That's not a big enough sample size. On the other side, I'll have people, I've genuinely had it. I've sent thousands of applications or hundreds or whatever. And I'll just say, well, that's too much because you're not able to spend that much time on each individual application. It is going to take a bit of perseverance. You're going to have to do quite a few and sort of fire them off and forget about them for your own sort of well-being. That's fine. Keep going. Keep trying, keep doing what you're doing. Obviously, if something's not working, maybe change your tactics, maybe come and have a chat. We'll see what you're doing, what's working, what isn't. But this is going to take a little bit of perseverance. Don't be afraid of that. It does take a little bit of work. I say a little bit, it's going to take quite a bit of work. But that's just kind of what the job takes at this point. And we can help with all of this. Get the support that is on offer. You have support from the Careers Service, us, while you're at university, obviously, but for 2 years once you've left as well. So make use of that offer. Now, the programs, they do vary in terms of length. I did say, I guess at the top, they can be from 1 to 3 years. Most commonly, it's around about 2 years. So just bear that in mind. All right. Over that 2 years, depending, it might just be the one job. It might be rotational, as I mentioned, in that you would get a sort of exposure to different aspects and different parts of the business. At the end of which, then you get your, I guess, permanent settled role. It can vary. Just know that going in. Do your research on the actual role. Ask those questions at interview. How long is the actual program? What's the training involved? What's it look like? What's the structure? Like I say, this can vary quite dramatically. So do that research going in. Can help a lot. Now, I've already talked about some of these myths. The first one you'll sort of recognize, graduate schemes are not the most common form of employment, of graduate employment rather. They're about 10% of all the graduate jobs available. So that's, I guess, why I'm sort of honing in on that. If you just limit yourself to graduate schemes, then you're missing out on 90% of the graduate jobs that you could apply to. That's not a good position to be in. So don't go in with that mindset. Yeah, graduate schemes are great. They're not the only good jobs out there by any means. And in fact, graduate schemes, they have that reputation for high salary, which broadly speaking is true, but not always the case. It'll depend on the scheme, it'll depend on the job, it'll depend quite a lot on the location as well, in the sense that, getting a graduate job is the best way to stay in Manchester. That's actually a myth. And because most graduates are going to be employed by what we call an SME, a small to medium sized enterprise. They don't use grad schemes by and large. They're just, small to medium sized businesses operating in and around Manchester or London or wherever. And a lot of these grad schemes, they tend to be quite location specific in that they might recruit you and then send you to another part of the country. You'll need to, again, do that research going in. Is that something that you want? Is that something that you're comfortable with? If not, then maybe at least that graduate scheme might not be for you. So again, go in with your eyes open. Graduate schemes as well, there's that kind of idea that they are just training. That is absolutely not the case. Graduate schemes are a graduate job. There is quite a lot of training and there's a lot of structure to them, but you will be working all the way through. It is a full graduate job. So that's why they can sometimes be associated with quite long hours and all that kind of thing, because there's the training embedded within a full-time job. That's quite a lot to manage. And as well, last myth I'm going to say, most important way to get a graduate scheme is by getting a good grade. That's not the case with any job, I'm afraid. The way I talk about graduate jobs in general is that your degree, whatever it is you're studying and the grade you get, that's kind of your baseline, right? I used to talk about a kind of employability triangle, and the base of that triangle was your qualification, which important, yeah. But on top of that, with your qualifications, your attitude, your experience, how you could talk about yourself, all these things that go a really long way to making you stand out, getting you that graduate job. These are the things that are really going to help. And again, things that we can help with. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of, I guess, food for thought. There are quite a lot of misconceptions that we quite like to challenge because, people come into graduate schemes with this idea of what they are and often very much not the case. Now, I mentioned this already, but that kind of idea of how to talk about yourself, that narrative, that's really important. It's the thing that we see most students and graduates struggle with, in the sense that being able to talk about yourself and being able to talk about your skills is quite a challenge. Because the way I sort of talk about it is when you're asked a question, particularly at interview, but in applications as well, it's very easy to talk about what you did. It's harder and more important to talk about how you did it. The how is what most people sort of forget, leave off. That's why STAR is so important. It's that situation, task, action, and result. And the action is what you did, how you did it. So let's say we take an example of communication. You're trying to demonstrate communication skills. Not just what you communicate, but how do you do it? Did you use a PowerPoint? Did you use a speech? Did you vary your language depending on who you're speaking to? All that kind of thing that would go into a really good application, a really good CV, or a really good interview. Now, I'm very aware that I'm going at quite a pace to get through all of this, and I'm not going into much detail on any individual thing. If that is something that you're concerned about, or it's something you just want a bit more detail on, obviously, I keep saying it, come and have a chat with us, or go onto our YouTube channel, look at the interview playlist that we have on there. It talks in loads of detail about what the STAR technique is, how to actually write and give good answers to these questions, and how to talk about yourself, how to articulate your skills. Because I promise you, that's probably the most important thing. I'll quite often see students who'll tell me, well, I don't have a lot of experience. Usually that's not true, because they will be discounting things like part-time work, volunteering, whatever. But more often than not, it's not the experience that lets people down. It's their inability or the way that they talk about their experience that lets them down. You're not giving a good enough account of yourselves in applications and interviews, and we can help with that completely through our ongoing support. Now, I've already talked about some of this. We have lots of events and lots of workshops. I run workshops on interviews, applications, job hunting, all that kind of thing. Make use of that. But if you feel like you would benefit from a more one-to-one approach, we have appointments. All of these are accessed through Career Connect. So we have careers appointments where we talk about what it is you want to do, how to get there, all the sort of the broader things, but also CV reviews, application reviews, mock interviews. Make use of us. This is going to be a process. You're going to need to get better at these things. You're going to need feedback. You're going to need practice. Get it use it basically. Use it while you got it. You got it for while you are here, and then for 2 years once you've finished. You can also be part of our graduate network. This is, I guess, part of that support. This is done through LinkedIn. We'll post loads of things about graduate schemes that we're aware of, roles that are coming up on Career Connect, our own internships. Some of you might be aware of Manchester Graduate Talent. These are internship roles that university posts every year. So again, make use of these things. We have had another question. Does taking a year off after university but still working reduce your chances of getting into grad schemes when you apply the year after? Absolutely not. No, it doesn't. In some way, I'm not going to say you have a better chance because you don't know who's going to apply for these things, but especially if you are working during that year off, you'll have a lot of, I kind of call it ammunition, but things to talk about in applications, in interviews. So absolutely not. It doesn't affect your chances one way or the other, really. Now, already kind of mentioned this, practice. Practice is super important because you are not going to get this right first time, or if you do, fantastic, but most people don't. So goes to kind of the support I've already talked about. Make use of that application support, CV support, mock assessment centres that we run. We'll be running those from around November time. Virtual assessment centres that we run, all these kind of things that can be really, really helpful. Make use of these things, okay? Couple more questions. So I'm a current master's student. Can I apply or for only accept GIR? I'm really sorry. I don't know what GIR is. Sorry, there's so many accurate acronyms flying around. What I would suggest in that instance is book an appointment with us and we can look at it directly with you. Graduate immigration route. So I would suggest book an appointment with us because that's going to be more, that's going to be very specific to you. And for obvious reasons, don't want to get into that on a call like this. Okay, what if you took a year off for traveling, volunteering? Absolutely. Same thing applies. Year out, year abroad, year traveling. Doesn't affect your chances whatsoever. Absolutely fine. How many years after graduating can you apply to the schemes? It depends on the scheme, to be honest. Broadly speaking, as a sort of general rule of thumb, 2 years, absolutely fine. But it depends on the individual scheme. Some have a sort of hard cutoff of 1 year. Some only accept graduates from that year, although those are very rare. If there are things you're particularly interested in, I'd do a bit of research and look at their schemes and look at what they're saying. Like I say, broadly speaking, 2-3 years is fine, but it'll vary quite significantly. Okay, already mentioned this, but I want to sort of hammer it home. Quality is always better than quantity. I see a lot of a trend at the moment. If anyone's on TikTok, careers TikTok is a thing, but they'll talk about it being a numbers game, firing off loads of applications, using ChatGPT to generate loads of applications and just throwing them out. It doesn't work essentially because you'll be generating loads of applications, but most of those will be of a mediocre level because you've not put a lot of effort in, because you can't if you're sending out that many applications, right? And I know this from experience because I've been on the other side. I'm part of recruitment panels on a fairly regular basis for the roles that we have here. This approach generates a lot more applications. So yes, there's going to be more competition. However, most of those are going to be sort of mediocre, which means that a good application stands out all the more. So a bit of an anecdote. We advertised for a careers advisor a few months ago, just a vacancy in the team. We got loads of applications. Most of them were kind of rubbish, but it meant that we could identify the good ones really, really quickly and easily. So the more effort you put into this, I promise you it will pay dividends because you will stand out all the more, because most people aren't putting that effort in. They're just generating volume. which isn't going to get you very far. All these things around showing interest in the actual organization and the role, demonstrating that enthusiasm, and articulating your skills through evidence. That is what we are after. That is what makes you stand out. And I promise you, we're not trying to catch you out here. When we're looking through applications, we want to say yes. Recruiters are looking for reasons to actually say yes because it makes our lives easier because we want that shortlist. I know it sounds a bit weird, but all the recruiter wants to do is get a decent shortlist to then interview. Whenever I've done it and whenever I used to do it, I used to work in recruitment. I always dreaded making the shortlist because I always thought, oh, maybe we're not going to get anyone that can justify being on that shortlist. But as soon as you do, it's yeah, great, fantastic. That's what we're after. And that's why the quality is the important bit. I've had another question. Is it all right to add the position I just got at the university to my CV, though I've not done enough to add experience? Yes, you would put that on your current CV because it's what you're doing now. It's all right that you haven't got much to talk about. You might just take things from the job description a little bit. I do have a specific workshop on CVs I'd probably advise you going to or looking at our YouTube channel for, because I talk a little bit about that, about how to make that work. Okay, again, I'm repeating myself, forgive me, but research, really, really important because it demonstrates, enthusiasm. It demonstrates you put effort into these things, but it can help your application stand out. Doing things like, yes, looking at their website, but they're also their social media. Are they coming up in the news at the moment? Are there any events? Can you mention events that you saw them at? Maybe speak to alumni, get that sense of what it's like to work there, maybe how they recruit, when they recruit, all these things to research that can make your overall job search that little bit more effective. So whenever I talk about things like this, it's not just that you know the company values. That's part of it, but a big thing that will help you is researching when they recruit, researching how they recruit. What is the process? Do they only use one particular website, or do they not really recruit until like March, for example? All these things are what I mean when I say research. The what are they looking for? That is certainly part of it. It's not the only thing. So think holistically about research. Now, in terms of start dates, this is a fairly easy one. They tend to start around June, September time. Not always, but as a general rule, obviously it's going to vary by graduate scheme, but that's when to be aiming for. This process does take time, recruitment does take time. Broadly speaking, we're aiming for a sort of start date between June and September. Now, like I said, there's going to be a lot of training within these programs. They are structured in such a way that training is a big part of them. And you've got some examples there. This is why they can be quite attractive to students and graduates. There are some downsides to that, though, along with the obvious upsides of, yeah, you're going to be qualified at the end of this, potentially, or have a lot of training. That can be quite difficult to manage because you are going to be doing a full-time role. Important to bear in mind. And not for all, but for some roles, for some graduate schemes where things like full professional qualifications are part of it. So things like if you're into accountancy, for example, ACCA or chartered accountancy or all that sort of stuff, they might well fund that qualification. But as part of that, there may well be an agreement that you have to stay with that organization for a specific number of years, or if you do leave, you then have to pay that back, potentially, the money that they invested in that qualification. Like I say, that's only with very specific graduate schemes, only with very specific roles, generally with accredited qualifications as part of that package, and it will be stipulated in the actual advert, in the interview process, all that sort of stuff. But just bear that in mind. Yeah, training can be really good. It can be really structured. Can be a bit of a challenge to manage along with the full-time role. So think about it. It's a pro, it's a con. Now, this, I would argue, along with being able to articulate your skill, is really important. Understanding what they are looking for. Now, I talk about this particularly in the applications workshop. You'll notice this is a bit of a distillation of a few different workshops for various reasons, but this is actually really easy to figure out. It will be in the advert, it will be in the job advert. They will tell you literally what they're asking for in the job advert. It will be a bit of a cheat sheet. And these are the things they tell you are the things that you need to evidence in applications and particularly interviews. It's no secret, really. This is why the research is important. And I would also say, keep a record of the things that you've applied to. Keep the job descriptions if you can. Most people don't do that. And then they get maybe invited to interview and they think, I don't know, what do I do? If you've kept this information, if you have that structured approach, it can be invaluable. It can actually help you stand out because you'll have things to prepare for, really. You'll have materials to prepare with. It can be really valuable. And I've already talked about this, but this is, I guess, the sort of the STAR technique distillated. This is how to articulate. Not just what you did, how you did it. The way I talk about this, you almost have to give a level of detail that is embarrassing because you will be going over what you consider to be fairly basic stuff, right? A good example is how you manage your time. You're not in the habit, or most people aren't, of talking about how they use Google Calendar in great detail or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is you use to manage your time. Most people just manage their time. That's how they do it. Some people, they might have write to-do lists or whatever, and they get a bit of a buzz off crossing things off the to-do list, and that is how they motivate themselves. That's the level of detail we need because it demonstrates you actually understand what managing your time is. Now, like I say, I go into this in a lot more detail in some of the other workshops and the recordings on YouTube. So if that's something you want a bit more detail on, go and have a look at that. But broadly speaking, a little bit more detail than you think you need and going over, I guess, what you would consider the basics. All right. Now, just to touch on values, I already kind of talked about this. Values is this kind of thing of what's important to you now. It goes to, I guess, that idea of, do you want a grad scheme, the sort of pros and cons? What is important to you? That'll help you make this decision, right? Do you want that training? Do you want to work for a really large company? Or do you not? Is location really important to you? Are professional qualifications really important to you? Is it just about cold hard cash? If so, absolutely, go with God. But do that reflection. What is it you want from your first next job? And really put that work in. Okay. What is a good graduate role or a good graduate scheme for you is going to be very different to what it is for the person sat next to you or in your lectures or whatever. That can be very different things. So think about what it is that's important to you. Do you want travel? Do you want to be challenged? Do you want to be part of a team? Do you want to be working with people? Or do you want to be traveling a lot and not really seeing many people, working on your own? Just, you don't necessarily need an answer now, but start thinking about these things. It'll help you make that decision of, do I want a grad scheme and what sort of grad scheme do I want? Do I want it with these organizations? Might sound a bit wishy-washy, but that will then help you make a strong application because you'll know you'll be committed and you'll be able to talk about that at application and at interview, why you want to work here, what is important to you. Now, already talked about this before, but where to find these roles. You'll get these links, so don't worry too much. But the big ones that I would suggest, Prospects, really, really valuable. Target Jobs, biggest graduate job website in the UK still. That's where a lot of them will be advertised. And then the Career Connect vacancy portal, which you'll hopefully be aware of, given that you booked onto this and found this event. That is where we post everything that we as a university are aware of. But it's a bit low tech. I still think you can't really beat creating a target list of organizations you're interested in working for and checking with them on a regular basis their own recruitment portals, because you cannot guarantee that any individual graduate scheme or graduate role will go to any individual website. The only thing you can guarantee is it'll be on their own websites. So, as well as checking those websites that I already mentioned, check regularly with the employers you're interested in. It's a bit more of a focused way of doing things. And then I, again, repeat myself, please forgive me, but it is really important articulating, talking about your experience. This is why I've sort of hammered the STAR technique. This is the thing we see most often that students, graduates really struggle with. And I'm going to sort of wheel out, I guess, one of the favorite things I talk about, in the sense that it can be really easy for you to sit there and think, I don't really have any work experience, or the work experience I have isn't relevant, or I've only got volunteering, or I've only got sport, or whatever it is. All of it is valid. All of it can be relevant to a job application, to an interview. All it's got to do is demonstrate a skill or an experience, right? My favorite example of this, it remains to this day my favorite interview I've ever given. Asked, I think, a 22-year-old grad, give me an example of a time that you've worked as part of a team. And she talked to me in loads of detail about how they were a nationally ranked World of Warcraft player and how they'd won all sorts of competitions. And they did that by knowing their class. They were the healer. They understood what their role was. They communicated with their teammates. They made sure that they were where they needed to be, when they needed to be there, all this sort of stuff. It demonstrated teamwork beautifully. Now, this is not me saying you all need to go out and play World of Warcraft or video games or whatever. What I'm saying is literally anything that you have can be valid, can be talked about at interview, can be put into applications, as long as it demonstrates those skills. This is why articulating your skills, whether it's on a CV or in an interview through things like the STAR technique, is really important. It is a skill in itself. Now, again, we have loads of resources on this. Probably the biggest thing that you can do for this would be to have an interview simulation with us. This is a mock interview where we take you through the whole interview process, give you feedback on your answers then and there, and how you can be better. This takes practice, and don't be afraid to put that practice in. It's a weird thing, but most people don't want to do this bit because it's uncomfortable, right? One of the biggest things I see quite often, I had it in an appointment today. You know, my applications need work, but I'm pretty confident with interviews. And then I actually said to this person who said it today, well, why are you pretty confident with interviews? Well, I feel like I can get by. I feel like I can do well. All right, but you've had 5 and none of them have led to a job offer. People don't want to do it. It is a bit uncomfortable. But if you do something like this, do the stuff that people are a bit reluctant to do, that's how you stand out. Putting yourself through this process, putting effort into the applications and not just using ChatGPT, all these things that people don't do now, or people are doing less, that is where you can maximize your chances of getting these things. Now, this is just the STAR technique in action. I'll let you just dwell on that. And like I say, you'll get slides for this. But hopefully you can see this is kind of what we need, that level of detail that almost feels embarrassing. Organising resident position got 100 signatures. Recycling procedure for 20 flats for 200 students, that we've been specific all the way through, as specific as possible. A level of detail that almost feels embarrassing. This is what we're after. This is what we mean when we talk about talking about your experience, articulating your skills. This is what will make you stand out, because most people either don't do this or don't know how to do it. Had a question, will the recording be made available? Yeah, absolutely. So I said at the top, you'll get sent the recording and the slides to this session. That'll be sent out on Thursday. So don't worry too much about all of these. Okay, and last couple of things. I'm sure I have presented this as a bit daunting because you're applying to loads, you are taking time, all this sort of stuff. It only takes one yes. And if you're doing this right, you are still going to be applying to quite a few jobs. As a sort of general rule, now this is going to be different for different people, but I would always say less is more. You don't want to be applying to loads because you're going to be burnt out, right? After 2 weeks, because I hear people say, oh, yeah, I'm applying to like 20 jobs a week or 20 jobs a day or whatever. I think, well, yeah, but how can you keep that pace up? I would argue, and this is going to be different for different people, so take this with a pinch of salt. But if you're targeting between 3 and 5 a week, that's pretty good going. That means that you're putting effort into those and that you're really taking your time over them. So bear that in mind. And what I do want you to do, and I had this again today, keep a record of what you're applying to. If you can, keep things like the adverts and the job descriptions. That's really good practice. But keep a record of what you're applying to, whether it's in this spreadsheet, something like this, or whatever. Two reasons I want you to do this. First is that you'll avoid the horrible feeling of getting a call from a recruiter and they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm calling you about that job that you applied to. And you have to say the horrible phrase, which one? You want to be able to have that information up to date, right? But the other thing is that if you keep this information, you keep a record of what you applied to, how far you got, where you got to, how successful you were. You can look at what's working and what isn't. Maybe you find you're always getting through to assessment center and getting shot down there. All right, we know then that it's the assessment center that's the issue. Then you can come to us and we can work on that. Or maybe it's the interview, or maybe you're not getting past application stage. What this lets you do is look at what's working, figure out what isn't, and diagnose the problem. Whereas if you come to us and say, I'm really struggling, and we say, okay, well, what bit are you struggling with? And you can't tell us, that makes it harder. So keeping this record just allows you to figure out what it is you're doing. Now, I'm very conscious of time. We are rapidly overrunning, right? Last thing I want to talk about is, I guess it's a bit of a truism, or it has become so, but like I said, I think earlier in the session, there's no such thing as a job for life anymore. Two things to say about this. So, broadly speaking, this is what a career sort of looked like, let's say 30 years ago. It doesn't really look like that anymore. The usual career is something like this. It goes back, it goes forward, it goes sideways. You might change company, you might completely change sector, you might completely retrain. I mean, just to give you a peek behind the curtain, my first role was in international recruitment because I wanted to use the French that I learned as part of my degree. Hated it, moved to careers because I wanted to work at a university. Yeah, you might have a career break, you might decide you want to go traveling in your 30s. All of that is perfectly valid. So please don't feel like you have to. We talk about career planning. You don't need to plan out your entire career. And if you do, it's probably not going to go to plan that way. And that is fine. You can regroup, refocus, rethink. All you need to do, and I say this because thinking about your career can be quite overwhelming sometimes, just think about what your next step is. What do you want your next job to be? That's all we need to think about. That's still a big question, but that might be okay. Maybe you just think about the sector you're in, or the sector you want to be in, or the company you want to work for, the type of company, the type of job. Just focus down. Think about it in little steps. That can help it feel less daunting and just focus on the next move, living a little bit more in the moment, right? Now, I am going to stop for a sec just to ask any questions. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. As you are writing those, if you do have any, I'm just going to sort of sum up because we're more or less at the end of the session, everybody. So this is the link to our website. Now, like I say, you will get these slides. So don't worry too much about taking notes. But I guess the thing I would say, this is our website. This is where we have a ton of information on different careers, different jobs, different things to help you get those jobs. So you'll see there applications, interviews, assessments, appointments. Make use of us, basically. You have support from us for 2 years once you've graduated and while you are here. The biggest thing that you can do now, if you are unsure of any of this, is just come and have a chat. Okay, that is dead simple to do. We are as open access as we can possibly be, whether, whatever age you are, whether you're neurodiverse, have a mental health condition, disability, whatever it is, we will make those arrangements for you. We have specific 60-minute careers meetings available for students with disability or health condition. We also have an open access desk where you do not need an appointment. You can just come and see us. Now, hopefully, yeah, perfect timing. So we are located on the first floor rather, of University Place in a place called the Atrium. This is where my team are available between 10 and 4 every weekday. You do not need an appointment. Just come and have a chat. We might point you in the direction of another part of the service. We might point you towards an appointment. We might point you towards an event. But if you just want to have a quick conversation, you're not really sure, come and see us or email us, and our email is there on the screen. That's careers.info@manchester.ac.uk. We're really responsive. We usually get back to people within the first 24 hours. We do say like 5 working days as a sort of get out of jail free card, but we're really responsive. So again, come and have a chat, ask us a question. Now, last couple of things I'm going to get you to do. Got 2 QR codes for you. The first one, as it says on the screen, this is to register your attendance. If you didn't manage to do this at the start, if you could do so now, that'd be really appreciated. This allows me to send you, like I said, slides and the recording of this session. And then the last thing I'm going to get you to do, the next QR code is going to be a link to our feedback survey. If you do have just 2 minutes to fill that out, I'd be really grateful. I know everyone's asking for feedback surveys in 2025. I'm sure you're as fed up with them as I am. We only ask for this because we are really responsive to the feedback we get. Everything that we are doing this year is a direct response to the feedback we got last year. So if you do have some time, we'd really appreciate it. Once you've done that, everybody, you are free to go. I will stop the recording